thank you for having me. Just talking about the Clark Fork Watershed Education Program, I know we have 2 other staff members that'll be doing some more talks in this particular program. So I'm going to kind of focus on this part of it, whereas the rest of the team will focus on some of the other things we do, because as Robert said, we go 1,000,000 miles a minute in every direction, doing all kinds of different things. So what I'm going to kind of talk about today, I'm going to focus on the Butte Reclamation Evaluation System, or the BREEZE, as I like to call it. Some people also pronounce it the BREZ, but it's the evaluation system for the mine caps here on the Butte Hill. And so CFWEP is a big part in that, where we get to go out and kind of do the evaluations along with a lot of students from Montana Tech. So as we go through, if it's something you're interested in kind of working with, we definitely encourage people to come out and be with us for those weeks that we are doing these evaluations. So that's kind of what I'm going to focus on. I'll touch a little bit on some of the remediation and restoration efforts in Butte as well, but I'm sure you guys get a lot of that. So I'm just going to do a quick shout out to Kayla Lappin, who's here, because this is our brand new logo. So I just kind of am excited to see it up there. We've had a logo for a long time, and this one looks so much better. So it's like my first time presenting with it, so I'm kind of in shock of it. So it looks really nice. All right, so I'll start off with just a little bit of Butte history. I won't go too in depth. I'm kind of a history nut with this stuff, but I'll just go a little bit. So this area, about the 1830s, was when gold was kind of first discovered, and people started to come this way in search of gold. That's the earliest we can find, is in the 1830s, when people started to come to the Summit Valley. And then through the 50s and 60s, it was kind of the 1850s and 60s, they were finding gold, but they were also finding some silver and some copper, but there wasn't really a ton of use for it at that particular time. So they kind of just would put it to the wayside. But in the 1870s, silver started to take off a little more, so a few more people were here starting silver mines, doing some of that. Copper then really started to boom in the 1880s with the discovery of the light bulb from Thomas Edison. So then Butte would become, over those next few years, would become one of the largest cities between San Francisco and Minneapolis at the turn of the 20th century. So big city. About at its peak, it's around 115,000 people. Around 1910 was when they projected that, so almost triple what the size we are now, a little over triple. The hill itself is named the richest hill on Earth, and for that we've received about $51 billion of mineral wealth out of the hill in that time period. So one of the richest places in the world as far as mineral wealth goes. Butte produced about 1/3 of the world's copper in the late 1800s and early 1900s, so it was a big thing. I like to point out, like during World War I, Butte, that was when they were producing about 1/3 of the world's copper, and people were put under martial law here in Butte to stay and work in the mines. That's how important the copper was at that time. Instead of going and fighting in the war a lot, they were here working in the mines to produce the copper for the war. So Butte was a big city at that point in time. Then we'll kind of just go into a little bit about open pit mining. So there was some open pit mining going on, but most of it kind of began in the 1955 when the Berkeley pit was started. And it would eventually swallow some Butte neighborhoods, including Meterville, Dublin Gulch, and McQueen. And that's a pretty iconic picture over there of them dumping some of the backfill of the Berkeley pit. Over the life of the Berkeley pit, 320 million tons of ore were removed. 700 million tons of waste rock were removed as well. So a lot of dirt was moved just from the Berkeley pit. It was shut down in 1982, and the pumps were shut off, which allowed the Berkeley pit to fill into what it is today. So some damages to the Clark Fork drainage, we'll start talking about those. By the turn of the 20th century, there was at least a dozen concentrators, precipitation plants, and smelters on Silverbow Creek alone. So there was a lot going on at that point in time. And for every shovel of dirt, only a small portion was valuable, was considered minerals. So the rest of that was all waste that had to be put somewhere. And so we have 3 main types of waste that we talk about here in Butte. Waste rock, tailings, and air pollution. So waste rock's kind of that first step, right, where we're taking it out of the mines, we blew it up. Some of that is ore grade and some of it's not. And so like this picture shows the waste rock piles that would be piled just up out of the mines. And so that's kind of the first step. Tailings would come later on, which is through the milling and concentrating step. So those tailings were, the minerals were crushed way down into small fine pieces, and that's the tailings was the waste part that didn't go on to the smelting step. And so mainly they would, in the early days, would flush those right down Silverbow Creek to move them out of the valley and kind of out of the way. And then finally air pollution, like we had dozens of smelters on Silverbow Creek, so lots of air pollution, and a lot of that stuff was settling out as well. Waste rock, like we said, was piled up next to all the mines in Butte. I mean, all those open hills that we're going to talk about as the Breeze sites were due to waste rock. Tailings were washed away down Silverbow Creek for over 100 years. It was considered a dead creek for over 100 years. So they were pushing it down the creek, and then we also had this huge flood of 1908, which was the largest flood we've ever had on record in the Clark Fork Basin, and it moved millions of cubic yards of mine waste downstream, and so behind the Milltown Dam, but all the way down the basin. Some of the places were over 18 feet deep in tailings, so a lot of work had to be done there. This is a picture here from where Browns Gulch Creek meets Silverbow Creek. That's just the floodplain of some of the damages that happened due to some of that flooding event. And then, like I said, Silverbow Creek was dead of fish, macroinvertebrates, pretty much anything. Some macroinvertebrates lived there that could tolerate really heavy metals, but mostly everything was gone. And here's just a picture of kind of, I'm sure it's around a lot, but it's a very visual picture of kind of the workings in Butte. So all those yellow dots up on top are different mines that were around Butte. The red ones are the major shafts that went down into the hill. And then all these different colored workings were the different tunnels and workings beneath the city of Butte. And then this big thing here, of course, is the Berkeley Pit. So it shows kind of, you can think about all that area, the waste that would come from that area came up to the surface, right? And so that was kind of what was on the hill. So the cleanup begins. The United States Congress passed the CERCLA, or more commonly known as Superfund, in 1980. That combined with the Clean Air Act of 1970 and the Clean Water Act of 1972 to start beginning the cleanup talk here in the Clark Fork drainage. The state of Montana also filed a lawsuit against ARCO that went beyond the EPA recognized damages, so that Montana sued on top of it and got some more money. And then the cleanup in the Clark Fork had begun around the 1980s, 1990s. So here's kind of a picture of our Superfund site. So this is the largest Superfund complex, is what we call it in the United States. And so we call it a complex because there's all these different moving parts to it. So we kind of have the Butte, or the upper stream with Silverbow Creek complex. We have the Anaconda area. We have the main drainage of the Clark Fork River. And we also have Milltown, where the dam was. So it spans about 120 river miles. So it's a huge place that has to be cleaned up. So we're going to kind of focus ourselves to the Breeze, and so to do that we need to talk about the Butte Priority Soils Operable Unit, so the BPSU. So that's kind of bringing it more closer to the home here. So the unit is including mine waste, impacted soils, and attic dust problems. That's kind of the things they fix within the BPSU. The area is outlined by following the groundwater and surface water that contributes its way down to Silverbow Creek as it leaves the valley. And it's all there to help Silverbow Creek. So we've spent a lot of money on Silverbow Creek to restore it. We have to take care of these mine wastes that are here on the hill to keep them from impacting Silverbow Creek. So the Breeze program. It was a system built to monitor the progress of these sites, okay, within the BPSU. So this picture on the right kind of shows us some of the sites. And so there's approximately 178 Breeze sites, okay? There's about 600 acres in total have been cleaned up from 1988 to present. And then the management of these sites, they removed some sediments in really high contamination areas, so they went around and tested these soils. High contamination areas, they did some full removals, but most of the areas there was too much to kind of be removed on the hill. So they capped and held those sediments with what we call the caps, bringing in topsoil, planting plants on top of them in areas that they were still bad but not considered a high contamination area. And then also building stormwater features to effectively run stormwater off the hill, because that was one of the biggest concerns with building these sites, is they had to direct water flow. So these 178 sites are broken up into 4 categories across the hill. So you can kind of see it by the colors. We've got some purple on top, the green ones, and then we've got orange and we've got blue. They tried to break them up into 150 acres apiece, and they did that because in 2012 we start to monitor these sites on a 4-year basis. So we wanted to have them about equal acreage every year, so that we weren't doing so many one year and not that many the next year. And so you can see the number of sites vary, but the acreage stays the same. So quadrant 1, a lot bigger sites with 29, and then we've got like quadrant 3 has 76 sites, but they're a lot smaller. So the evaluation of these sites began in 2007 through the BREEZE program. But then in 2012, we started to break out this system of these 4-year rotations. So here's just some kind of pictures of what the BREEZE sites would look like across the hill. So this is looking at the diamond mine on the top of the World Trail, kind of up by Granite Mountain Memorial. And so you can see on the left here, before the remediation came, these were all the mine dumps. That's kind of what it looked like all over the hill. And then they came in and did the work with the caps. They leveled these hills down because they couldn't leave them so steep that when the stormwater would run off, it would just wash everything that was on the hill off. So they graded them down so that they were a little less steep, and then they planted these restoration species in there. And just another one, because we do them on the floodplains as well. Some of them occur down towards Silverbow Creek. So this is the Colorado tailings before, as you can see, completely void of vegetation, and then this is kind of after. So we'll kind of get into talking about the BREEZE program and kind of what we do in the field. CFWEP is kind of the independent group on this, that we go in and we run through the BREEZE protocols and we figure out what is going on with the sites. And these, I laugh because we use these forms still today, but they're old. We have updated technology now, so we get to use iPads a lot more. But this is just kind of the layout of what we go when we're in the fields. I'm still kind of old-fashioned. I like to have my paper and pencil out in the field so that I can see what I'm doing. But I'll kind of go through each of these categories step by step so you can see what exactly we're looking for when we go through these sites. And this is just the back of them. As you can see, we take tons of notes when we're out there. We take notes on pretty much everything we can along the site so that we can enter it when we get back. So the first thing we look at when we go to one of these BREEZE sites is the vegetation. So the vegetation is given a score of its own. And the few things we look at when we're doing that is we want to figure out how many live species there are there. And now live species is the good species, the restoration species that were in the original seed mixes on the hill. We want to look for those, as well as native plant species. So these original species would be something like crested wheatgrass or Great Basin wild rye. And then we start to see a lot of the native species, which are kind of shown in these pictures, the blue flax and the yarrow. So we figure out, they're based on if they can hold soil well, and also if they were native to the hill. That's why they were planted there. Their whole purpose is to hold the soil in place so that it doesn't move. So that's the live species. Then we've got undesirable or weedy species, because there's lots of other plant species across the hill that aren't so good at holding soil. It doesn't mean they're completely bad, but they're just not great at holding soil. And so some of those are like cheatgrass, which can give us tons of problems on some of these sites, mustards, and then some salsify. There's tons of others, but those are some examples of ones that don't hold very well. So you can think about those like if you go to pull them out of the ground, they just kind of come out with one little root stem. And then we've got noxious weeds, so of course like spotted knapweed and leafy spurge, we try to mark those down, and they don't go towards any part of our score at all. We just, if a site really has a lot of them, it needs some repair for sure. Then we check on litter. So litter is considered anything that's dead plant matter or loose from the old or the plants that are there and are just kind of laying on top of the surface. And then rocks, so anything over 2 inches in diameter is what we look at. And then of course bare ground, so we look at these bare ground spots. So every time we're going in to check our vegetation, these are the few things we look at. And only 5% of the undesirable species can be counted towards the total live score, because you can have some sites that are completely overran with these weedy species and they might make up 70% of the site, their vegetation, but they're not what they need to be there. So they can only count for 5%. So then we calculate this total live score, and it falls into one of these bottom categories. So we have 0 to 20%. If it falls in there, it's what we call a reclamation improvement. So the recommendation would go back to say this site has to be come in and some engineering has to be done to kind of fix it. 21 to 39% says we need some vegetation improvement. So maybe come in with some more seed mixes, or the recommendation would be to improve the vegetation somehow. And then 40 to 100% would go into the monitor category, where it would just kind of hold for 4 more years. We'd come back and look at it again to make sure it's still holding in that monitor category. So here's just kind of a couple pictures of what some of these sites look like with the vegetation. Some of them have really thick vegetation on them, compared to others have some issues with lots of weeds and cheatgrass and are more sparse, so they can be in any of those categories. We also do a lot of work with native plants. So we work with Montana Tech and Robert here to incorporate the native plant project in what we do. So there's a lot of these native plants that are now starting to come across the hill. And in the original Breeze program, there wasn't a lot of mention of these native plants. So we've been partnering with Robert to teach us more about these native plants that are returning on the hill, so we can identify them and put them into the right categories that they need to be when we're evaluating these sites. So things like lupin, and then of course the blue flax and the yarrow there are a bunch of them that we start to see across the hill. And they're really pretty on certain days. This picture was taken last year in June on some of the sites there. One thing we also do with this is we go through a calibration process. So when the evaluation team goes out, we kind of all meet at the beginning, and then we kind of need to train our eye, and then also check ourselves as we go through. So we run plant frames. We've kind of built these wooden plant frames, and they have a laser pointer on the end of them, and we'll do like 10 frames across the site. Each frame has 10 spots where the laser pointer goes down and it tells us what's there. So whatever the laser pointer hits, whether it's live, litter, undesirable, noxious, then we can kind of calibrate what we saw with our eye compared to what the frames told us. And if we're really close and everybody's on the same page, we will start to not use them for every site. But when we first get started, we will use these frames on every single site so that we're making sure that we're matching what's actually there. Then we go into erosion. This is kind of the next thing that we'll look at when we go onto sites. And it's to ensure that stormwater is not impacting the site. So these categories here are what we look at when we're looking at stormwater, or at the erosion scores. So surface litter, we want to see if is there a lot of this litter that's laying on the ground. Is it getting pulled down the hill from stormwater, which in that case can open up some bare ground for more water to run in and make gullies. Is there surface rock movement? Is there a bunch of this surface rock that's on there? Are they tumbling down the hill and causing issues? Pedestaling is one thing we can look at. Some of these plants have really big bases, and as erosion starts to happen, they'll start to dig around the plants, and so you get these pedestals that stand up. If you ever walk across, you'll hit them with your feet and almost trip. So if they start to get to a certain height, then that can prove to be not good for the site. Flow patterns, when we're standing on a hill, we can kind of look down and see if you can see like a place where the water has gone, maybe like mowed the vegetation down, we'll look and see if that's happening, to see if too much water is running down a portion of this site and it needs to be diverted somewhere else. We'll look at rills, depths, and frequency. So rills are anything that's under 6 inches in depth. So you can see that we're measuring here in this gully. So if it's under 6 inches, we consider them rills. And then of course we look at gullies as well, so anything over 6 inches that is ripping up a site we'll definitely look at, and their frequency. And then soil movement in general. Do we have these big like blowout events where hills are coming off the site and down into the street and things like that? So we use a rubric. There's a rubric set up with numbers on them that tell us, okay, is this good, or is it high, low, or high, right? And so we come out with these scores. And so if it's 0 to 55, we put it into the monitor phase. It gets evaluated again in 4 years. If it's in the 56 to 100 category, it means that we need, our recommendation is that they come in and do some engineering on this site and fix it. So here's just kind of some other pictures of some of the erosion issues. So this was a hill on one of the sites that you can see a bunch of the water is rolling down off the hill. I gotta fix my thing fell off here. Okay. And then here's an old site of what kind of the erosion issue was causing, right? So this is the Buffalo Dumps here, and you can see how steep they are. There's no vegetation. Every time it rains or the snow melts, right, all that's flushing off right down into the storm drains, going down the streets, eventually ended up in Silverbow Creek. So when fixing these sites, they would grade these hills down to try to stop that erosion. So that's kind of what we're looking for to see. Okay. Site edges is another thing we look at that can give us some issues on some of these sites. So we have these particular ones we look at. We can also mark them with whatever we want that's there. But we look for lime rock barrier. So is some of that lime rock barrier that's supposed to be below the soil cap, is it starting to appear on the site edge? If that's the case, there could be some waste material that's following it. Are there more weeds? We try to control the weeds on these sites as well because they can choke out some of the vegetation we want there, and generally the site edges will have more weeds because there's more water flowing into it, there's more traffic along it. Is there increased erosion for the same reasons? Is there gullies along it? Sometimes we'll get gullies ripping down the edge because that's where the stormwater bumps up against the site and rushes down it. Depositional area, is there places where there's a bunch of sediment backing up? Steeper slopes, less vegetation, or anything else. You know, maybe there's a bunch of trash or something along that whole section that we would want somebody to come take a look at. Just kind of good health things for the community. So we'll flag those out as well. Next thing is exposed waste material. So this is kind of what we're doing the whole project for. We want to make sure that these exposed waste materials are staying below the cap. And so when we see these, we mark them with our GPS points and they're recorded immediately. We also test them with our Halige kits, so that's kind of what they're doing here, to test the pH of them so we can record that as well. And then if these are present within a site, we definitely flag them immediately so that they can be attended to. We also look at soil movement. That's another important piece of this, especially bulk soil failure, land slumps, subsidence. Any of that could expose a bunch of waste. And we also have issues kind of every spring in Butte where, you know, we have all this voided area under our hill. And so sometimes with the stormwater, we get these big areas that open up and these land slumps that fall and things that happen. So if we find those, we definitely mark them out as a high priority as well. Barren areas is another thing that we are concerned with, and so this would be any area that would be at least 75 square feet and have at least less than 10% cover on that thing. And then we also look across the site. Is more than 25% of the site covered in bare ground? If it is, it's probably going to be recommended that it's in that evaluation stage. But we mark those out so that they can come in and kind of do some spot treatment if they decide to. And then finally, we kind of record the gullies as well. So again, anything over 6 inches, are they active on the site or are they healing? Because sometimes we get these healing gullies where they have washed out from a certain event, but then vegetation has reestablished and they're healing. So usually they'll be left in place. But if we have these gullies that are actively eroding, we'll definitely mark those down as a potential problem area. The other thing we started to map about 4 or 5 years ago was stormwater features. We started to map these out so that the people that went out and did the work were aware of where water was kind of flowing and what features we had out there. And so these features might include something like a natural grassline ditch. Maybe we were just walking across the site and there's a natural area where the water is flowing. We would mark those out. Curb and gutter areas where there was curb and gutter to help the stormwater flow. Concrete line ditches, asphalt line ditches, stormwater drains at every corner, we would mark those so we knew where they were. Sediment capture basins, we'd also look at them and see if they maybe needed to be cleaned out. And then other areas or features that would be stormwater, storm drain water. So Breeze, after this field data is collected, we enter it into a program. Now, before 2015 or before 2016, we had to manually do these, or the people had to manually do them. So they were all on paper form, and we would hand them in, and then someone would sit at computer and enter those. So now we've gotten kind of high tech with this stuff, and we've had to learn all of our stuff again, but we have field iPads now that we go into the field with. And all the features that we actually map, like in the first years when we were doing this, we'd have a map and we'd have to actually like draw on the map the best we thought of where these things were at on an aerial photo. Now we've got the iPad that has the GPS in it, and we can just walk it. So if we have an issue, we can just walk the perimeter of it, and it automatically uploads the area of the affected site, and then we can type in right live time what it is, descriptions. We can even take photos with the iPad and upload them to the same thing. So it just makes the whole system way better and easier to follow, because somebody can walk back out there with the iPad right to where we marked it and take a look at it. And then with the field data as well, like the data on those sheets, we upload those into an online form as well. We still have to enter them manually once we get back to the office, but it's a lot quicker, and our notes go right up to it. So we can enter all those notes we've taken about the site, and then of course the recommendations that we're talking about. So after the evaluations, so CFWEP is involved in these evaluations. But once that information and the recommendations has been sent out in the online form, then they're reviewed by these agencies. And so then they will come together and decide what's best. So they might look at our recommendation and they'll go out and talk about what the next process is. So we don't really have any stake in what happens there. We just record what is on the site. So we're that independent group for these particular agencies. So the future of the breeze. These breeze sites are going to continue to be evaluated every 4 years, okay, on a 4-year rotation. So whether they're in that monitor phase or not, they have to be evaluated. So the thing with remediation compared to restoration is we have to keep track of them all the time. So they're going to be continued to be monitored probably forever. If the sites pass, like I said, they'll just go into that monitor phase and just be recycled. If they fail, they'll most likely have a corrective action plan to fix them, depending on what is best decided. And so the sites, for the most part, they're continually improving. I've been lucky enough to be through 2 full rotations now. So I've walked, Raylyn and I have walked almost every acre of these 600 acres. And it's amazing to see the progress that's happening with them over the last few years. So definitely steps are being taken forward. The one thing we like about the breeze too is we want to add more education about the breeze sites. It's definitely important for the community to be involved in them and to know what's going on the Butte Hill. Because a lot of these are, no joke, in people's backyards. Like, we have to go knock on people's doors to be able to go evaluate them. And some of them are on parts of businesses, because not all of them are vegetative caps. Some of them are concrete caps. Some of them are parking lots now. So we do have to, we want the public to be involved, and also they know what's going on with the breeze. So these are a few ways that, that you could get involved if you wish to. We do use interns in the summer from Montana Tech to help with these evaluations. So if it's something you're super interested in, we're always looking working with Robert to help us with this. Come out in the spring for a few weeks. We usually start this the second half of June, and we run it. We try to be done by the 4th of July. Usually takes us 2.5 weeks depending on the site. And we try to get them within that 2-week window, so we work pretty hard for 2 weeks because we want all the sites to always kind of be around that same time frame so we can look at them year after year. And then just a few ways you guys can learn more about this if you want to is you can come help CFWEP on one of our middle school field trips. We go help teach middle schoolers about the remediation and restoration around here, and that's kind of what Abby's talk will focus on when she is here sometime in November. And so if you want to hear more about that, definitely see her talks. But you can come and help these middle schoolers learn, and it's a great learning experience for you as well, because you're out there working with them and you get to learn right alongside them. You can also check out our Answers to Superfund issue of the Montana Steward. I did bring some copies, so if you want one when you go to leave, please grab one. And then you can also check us out on our website, www.cfwep.org, and you can get some information there as well. I have to always do a huge thank you. So first of all, to Julia Crane from Butte Silverbow Planning Department. She has helped us a lot on this BREEZE program, and also with some of the numbers and things that I couldn't get myself. I got from Julia Crane, because she's the one who runs the database, and so all the numbers with the sites and the acreage and all that comes from her. And then also our CFWEP staff. So we couldn't do any of the work we do without our awesome CFWEP staff. So I know Ray Lynn's here, and Dr. A, and Abby, and Kayla, and Evan are here. Tammy Teal and Tavi are not, but that's our staff that's here at Montana Tech. And then also have to thank Dr. Robert Powell too for all he does for the BREEZE program, and then for CFWEP in general. So I hope you guys found it informational. I was trying to go for just kind of what we do in the evaluations. I know Julia did a presentation last year. I'm not sure if any of you guys caught that, but that was more on the technical side of things that was done after the evaluations. This is what we're able to do as the independent group in those BREEZE evaluations. So if you guys would like, I'd love to answer some questions for you guys.